just saying we should have a low-cost carrier last-minute seat sale just to top up the seat factors, but I think quality and premium attendance is of the essence of. I can see a few people are realising that they were in the wrong place and are now coming in here. We heard a lot from the leading low-cost carriers this morning about what they're doing and changing in strategy. The large pan-European companies, some of those who've been attendees in force at the World Low-Cost Airline Congress over previous years. But we're seeing a lot of changes now amongst what I would say, the legacy carriers, of course, here in Europe. But they've had the Air France KLMs, the Lufthansas, the IAGs have had involvement in one form or another with low-cost carriers over time, but we're seeing significant change. And so I'm really pleased today that we're going to be able to look a bit more detail into that in the next couple of sessions. So without spending any more time, I'd like to welcome my guest for this session to the stage from Holland, who's flown especially, Mattijs ten Brink, is that correct?
Got That's that right?
Correct. Great, thanks so much. You sit there, and we'll give you one of these mics to make sure everybody can hear what you have to say. Welcome to the Low-Cost Airline Conference. You are a KLM man by background, so when did you personally become low-cost and change your DNA?
No, I think it's a good opening question, because I think the difference between the traditional airlines and the low-cost, when it comes to cost, is disappearing a bit. And as you may have seen when you did my background, I'm from the cargo part of the airline. And if there's one thing we always paid attention to very closely, then it's cost. So in that respect, the step from cargo to Transavia, a low-cost airline, was a simple one.
But I can tell you really have assimilated the low-cost DNA, because your tie is off, and you do see some people sitting up here who claim to be working for low-cost airlines, and the tie is still on. So that is a positive thing. Now, I mentioned to you before we came on, I did do some research on you, and I hope now I'm not going to be highly embarrassed by finding out that I did look at the wrong LinkedIn profile. But I looked at what I believe is your LinkedIn profile, and this is what Mattijs has on his LinkedIn profile. It says, I try to adhere to the lines from the poem Invictus. I don't know that poem myself, maybe somebody else does. I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul, which sounds like a song title, actually. But how can you be the master of your fate and captain of your soul running a low-cost airline in a legacy group? Isn't that a contradiction in terms?
Maybe I'll start with the personal part, if you don't care.
Was it the right LinkedIn profile?
It is the right LinkedIn profile. I only have one.
Okay.
And I think there's only one with my name actually on it. So one, I think you really have to make sure you have always enough options in your own life to have a choice, and never to be forced in a corner where somebody else is going to decide on your fate. And if you translate that also into a more business perspective, I do think that also running an airline like Transavia, you have to create your own options. Whether you're part of a bigger group or you have a supervisory board and shareholders, you always have stakeholders around you who have something to say about your fate. I think the only way to keep the fate in your own hands is to perform. Because that gives you the strength to decide your own roads and sail your own course. And I think that's what we have tried to do. I'm very happy that lately, I think we've been rather a bit in the news the last couple of weeks. I think we've been quite successful to finally convince a lot of people that it's worthwhile to take what I think is the crown, or the pearl in the crown of Transavia, into Europe, and to further expand our brand and our formula.
Well, that's exactly the kind of thing I think the audience is going to want to hear about. We're going to come on to it in a moment. But I think maybe first let's just set the scene a bit, because not everybody in the room may know a lot about Transavia, but you're not a Johnny-come-lately on the aviation scene. Transavia in Holland, I'm talking about specifically, has been around some time. Can you just give us a quick kind of brief answer, as it were, give us a history of Transavia? How long has it been around, and what's been its business model over time?
Well, we have a bit of an argument whether we exist 50 years next year or it is the year after, because we were actually created 49 years ago, but we had our first flight 48 years ago. And we were created particularly as a charter company servicing the tour operators in the Dutch market. That's always been our bread and butter. And only in the beginning of this century, we made a transition also into what is now called, but at that time wasn't even existing really, into the low-cost arena. And that transition has been speeded up in the last couple of years, also because we've seen the tour operator market rapidly changing and in parts also deteriorating.
Well, in what sense? Because I mean, low-cost airlines generally, they and tour operators don't go together. You know, it's like two different breeds. But you say you came from that history. What's actually happening to tour operators in Holland? We've seen their role decline in the UK. Is that because of a change in the low-cost phenomenon?
Not to oversimplify the matter, but what happened mostly is that the tour operators traditionally had a monopoly on the beds. Hotels had only one channel to market their beds outside the Greek islands, the Canary Islands or whatever, and that was through the tour operators. With the introduction of internet and sites like Booking.com, Expedia or what have you, obviously hotels have had different ways now to market their beds, and so the tour operators lost their monopolies, markets opened up, the locals jumped in, and with the increasing transparency, put a lot of pressure on the margins of the tour operators. So they have to change. I think there will be two models remaining. One will be the wholesaler type, who in a more or less traditional way, but then fully online, will buy big chunks of beds, seats, and what have you, and combine it into a package at a very low cost and with a very low distribution cost, market that to the consumer. And the other ones will be using more the big data and will go for the individual travel experience tailored to an individual consumer.
So in this evolution for yourself as an airline, I mean, what percentage of direct sales are you getting with the public now? Has it shifted for that being the...
Today it's about 50%.
50?
Yeah.
So the tour operator role is still pretty strong.
Yeah, and again, don't get me wrong, and I think there was also some misunderstanding last week when we also announced our own strategic plans, is that the tour operator will remain a very strong and successful distribution channel, which we think will be around 30% over time. And that's exactly the percentage we have in mind to have as part of our model also in the years to come. And we will use our experience in that channel to also find other business partners, because it is a different thing, it is a different way of working, the direct selling, which is traditionally low cost, and working with business partners like tour operators, but also travel management companies. And we will use our experience also to create a good market there.
Now, prior to coming on into your course to what's happening today with Transavia, Transavia was a Dutch company. It was on its own. I'm trying to think a few years back, certainly before you were in the role, you did try a Transavia Denmark. That was a short-lived operation, which I forget, maybe did it last a couple of years, that operation? That market got
I wouldn't, probably you better count it in months than in years.
Really? Okay. So that was an experience not to be repeated. But what is the Dutch travelling public's view about low cost? I assume it's pretty positive, because we're now seeing EasyJet announced they're already strong in Amsterdam Schiphol, but they're going to open a base. I assume the Dutch public is very similar to the British public. They've bought into the low cost concept substantially.
No, absolutely. And I think just as some people on your island, we have sort of a stingy character. So we like low cost, we like budget as Dutch people. But the interesting part is that the penetration of the low cost in the Dutch market has been relatively low. If you know that today Transavia has 50% of the Amsterdam low cost market, that's pretty amazing for a company our size. So it proves that competition will increase, and probably not only EasyJet but also others will try to get a foothold in Amsterdam.
Well, also you have Ryanair is operating in other smaller secondary airports in Holland. EasyJet's moving in. Do you feel fearful being part of a legacy group? Do you feel less well placed to handle that competition which is coming your way from these big guys?
No, I think we were extremely well placed. We have a 98% name recognition. We have a very strong brand with more than 70% of our customers returning more than twice a year. So sure, competition is always tough. You have to handle it. We work very closely together with, obviously, with KLM in Amsterdam. So I'm not saying we welcome competition, but I'm not afraid. and we will do what we have to do.
Well, you mentioned you work closely with KLM, and you and I were chatting before, and as you know, I'm a ex-KLM family with their low-cost subsidiary here, which was actually sold to Ryanair. I remember in those days we found it difficult. KLM, the big bad mama, as our CEO used to call KLM, tended to keep interfering in our children's affairs. Do you really work with KLM, or is it a matter of avoiding them interfering?
No, we work very closely on a number of areas. I think one of the key success factors of starting a low-cost airline or expanding a low-cost airline within a traditional airline group is the arm's length steering. It doesn't mean that at certain areas, fleet, network development, there can be no synergies. The other parts, like loyalty programs, sure, there are synergies, and you have to use them because that puts us ahead of some of the independent low-cost players out there.
And I mean, Ryanair in particular has a different model, or at least up to this point in time. You and they don't come head to head because we're not in Amsterdam, but you have other Netherlands bases. Are there anywhere you?
Yeah, we have one in the southern part of the Netherlands, Eindhoven, where Ryanair is about, I think, top of my head, 40%. We have 35%. By the way, they didn't have a very nice summer, I think. So I think that proves our point because our flights were
didn't have a nice summer in what sense? They didn't do too well.
They didn't do too well
in the market, and you did.
And we did. So again, I think there on a very small scale, we have proven that we're ready to take Transavia further than just the two home markets, the Netherlands and France.
Now, I was going to say, a French market came along a bit later. We're going to be joined in a while by Ellen Abrams, who indeed set that company up. But it seems to me a little bit odd looking from the outside in. Why have two Transavias? Is the one not enough? And just have like a French division and a Dutch division?
No, I think whether we today, looking back is always easier, whether we should have done it in exactly the same way is questionable. I think what has been in the press last week, we will create a third airline. And we will do that differently than we've done with Transavia France. But I think together with Hélène and the team, and we, I wasn't there, but I still will talk in we, I think have proven that the formula of Transavia can be also successful outside the Dutch market. If you listen to our customers in France, they're extremely positive and exactly the same attributes they give to us in the Netherlands, they also give to Transavia France in France. So we've been able to copy the formula in all successful ways in France. I think the name recognition is increasing drastically. And within 1.5 years, Transavia will be the biggest player in Orly. So I think there, again, it proves that success can be copied.
But is it run, although you have an OPPO, there's a French CEO, does Transavia operate business-wise as a homogeneous entity despite the two markets? I'm thinking because Air France KLM as a parent group, there's still things that are distinctly French, distinctly Dutch, even the onboard product is different. And if that's the case for low cost, that doesn't sound logical.
But don't forget that Air France and KLM are two different brands.
Exactly.
Transavia is one brand, and the look and feel of Transavia, whether it's in France or in Holland, is exactly the same. The commercial teams are fully integrated, but only operationally speaking, we are a bit more independent than maybe traditionally low cost with their respective bases are.
And fleet-wise, you're flying the same kind of kit that other low-cost carriers are, 737s, two types.
Two types, the 700 and the 800, although Transavia France will fully go for the 800. We still believe in the 700. We have at the moment 9 700s in the fleet. We'll continue to operate them. It's one cockpit, so for pilots exchange it doesn't really matter. And on certain routes and on certain parts of the year, the 700 is just more effective to certainly also start up new routes. But over time, we will only add the 800s, so increasingly they will become more important than the 700.
For the time being, you're going to keep the two sizes. Doesn't give you really any inefficiencies.
No, because with 9 and possibly over time 7 or 8, you have enough flexibility still to operate them. When it comes down to a number of 5 or 6, you probably have to speed up the change of the 700s into the 800s, or at that time maybe the MAX.
Now, we'll just touch briefly, have a short time in this slot, but and I think if you don't mind audience-wise, I think we'll save questions for Mattijs into the second part when we've got a little bit longer time. But we've just had the big news last week of the rollout of Transavia Europe, and it's going to be headed up by a Dutchman from what I've seen. I don't know if that's a permanent thing or he's initially running the implementation project, but I saw his name the other day, doubtless a colleague of yours. On the one hand, especially having had experience of the KLM group, I can see that's a big step forward to go in scale. We're talking about up to 100 aircraft. But I was at a financial conference yesterday, and you won't be surprised at this. The CFO of Ryanair was there, and he said, well, the same old mistakes have been repeated again and again in Europe. Here we go. The old Transavia plan has been dusted off. It won't work. What is your riposte to Ryanair's view of the world?
Yeah, I realize there are many cynics out there. And I'm certainly not will try to convince them, as I'm not a preacher by nature. But we haven't decided on this lightly. We know the strengths of the existing Transavia. We also know the weaknesses of the existing Transavia. There has been a lot of talk about that as well. But we believe in the brand, we believe in the formula, we believe that there is a place for another large low-cost airline, which will position itself clearly distinctly from the others. And time will prove that we will right, or that the CFO of Ryanair is wrong or right. And I think let the customers talk. I think that is the only criteria we should look at.
I saw in the presentation that was given to the markets last week about the first steps on this. You're looking for, I think, 10, 20 bases, maybe half of them outside of France and the Netherlands. And I know you're not at liberty to say exactly which ones, but there's been speculation about places like Porto and Munich. Why would you pick to become number 3 carrier? Let's say that Porto is true, it is on the list. When you already have Ryanair there, the base, and EasyJet's just about to have a base. Are they not just going to eat you up for lunch?
No, we will only pick bases where we believe that in a relatively short period of time we will be either number 1, 2, or 3. So that's 1. And 2, I don't think there is any place in Europe you can find where you will not face one of the other low-cost airlines. And if you are afraid of them, you should not start at all. And as I told you before, we're not afraid. We believe in what we're doing. So we'll meet them in Munich, we'll meet them in Porto, we'll meet them anywhere where we believe there is a market. Because again, I think let the customers talk with their feet and see who's doing better.
But you mentioned the strength of the brand, but I think outside of France and the Netherlands, Transavia is not known, with maybe the exception of Portugal. I think maybe a stronger identity there. Is that not going to lead to a lot of cost to try to just get some traction, to get known? You know, these guys, Ryanair and EasyJet, they are now known. They're pan-European brands, and they trip off the tongue for many consumers. Is that not itself going to be a pretty steep challenge to overcome?
I think nobody will deny that it's going to be a tough fight, and that it's going to cost money to wiggle yourself into that market. You've mentioned Portugal. I think we can also mention Italy. More than 50% of our customers on board of our existing flights from Holland to Italy are actually Italian. So the point of sale Italy is doing very well. So we're a well-known brand also in that country. And yes, it will take effort. Yes, it will take time, and yes, it will take money to also get the same thing going in other countries. But again, that's the investment we're willing to make.
Great. Well, Mattijs, we'll stop the grilling for now. Hopefully you'll agree to come back for part 2. I told you I'd save the easier questions for the first half. Thanks very much for now, Mattijs. We're going to now switch over to